Let's talk about yield curves versus yield spreads. So naturally, when you lend money or borrow money for longer periods of time, you expect to pay a higher rate because there's naturally more higher risk. So if I'm lending money for 6 months versus a year versus three versus five versus 10 versus 30, naturally, I expect a much higher return for lending it for 30 years than for 6 months. And that's would be a normal economy if you have an upward sloping yield curve, which is basically just if you were to graph the returns that you would be getting on fixed income, let's say for treasuries or AAA, oftentimes it's going to be for treasuries, like the 6 month T-bill versus let's say the 1 year T-bill versus the 3 year T-note, 5 year T-note, 10 year T-note, 30 year treasury bonds, and you kind of compare it, and the line should be just kind of going upward, sort of, sort of like a curve. It's going to be sloped. I wouldn't really call it parabolic, but slightly upward sloping. So, what happens if that's reversed? What happens if it's negative sloping, like going downwards? So that did happen in the 80s when we had stagflation, where 6 month for 6 months, if you were to buy a T-bill, you were getting 20%, but yet for 30 years, you were only getting 15%. So how does that make sense? So the expectation is that interest rates are going to come down. That's why there could be a difference, and plus short-term interest rates are more volatile than long-term. So that's how that can happen. And I mean, another thing, explanation for that would be if people are buying long-term bonds and they're selling short-term bills. That can possibly happen because obviously the rate would come down on the long term and the rate would go up on the short term if you're selling. So with when you have a negative or inverted sloping yield curve or negatively sloping yield curve, what that means is there's an expectation of a recession or at least expectation that interest rates are going to come down. There's also something called a flat yield curve, where basically interest rates are almost the same, whether you borrow for 6 months, 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, 10 year. That just means economic uncertainty. I feel like that happens even less often than the inverted because it's just for the probability for the rates to be almost the same. It's kind of not very common. Now, when we talk about yield spread, a yield spread is basically going to be the difference in what you're getting on, let's say, a 1 year T-bill versus a 1 year AAA versus a 1 year AA, a 1 year single A, a 1 year triple B, a 1 year double B. So naturally, there is going to be a difference, right? Because a 1 year T-bill is virtually risk-free. 1 year AAA is going to be a little more risky. 1 year AA is going to be even more risky, and so on and so forth. But the spread really matters, right? So let's say there's a set spread, X amount of basis points. Whether that spread narrows or widens is basically an indication of people's expectations about the economy. So let's say that spread widens, meaning that the gap between a 1 year T-bill versus a triple A versus a double A versus single A, it becomes more drastic, especially as it gets more risky. What people are saying is that the expectation that there's going to be a recession or economic uncertainty, so everyone's going to be piling in to the government bonds that are risk-free, right? And that can even cause all the other rates to go up except for the 1 year T-bill, right? Because if everyone's piling it in, the rate's going to come down. So it could become even more drastic that way. So that's and then vice versa, if that spread's going to narrow, what people are basically saying, they're basically saying that what's the point of me buying a 1 year T-bill when, a triple A 1 year bonds like an Apple or something like that is going to be just as safe, right? So at that expectation is that the economy is improving, I'm willing to take much more risk because I know the economy is good, and the double A is basically as safe as the triple A is as safe as the government. So basically that's what people were thinking, and that can actually cause people to pull out of uh, T-bills, and then all of a sudden that rate's going to go up too. So they're all kind of linked together. So I hope that makes sense, and hope whoever's listening has a fantastic day. Thanks.